Catherine King, the Shadow Minister for Regional Development, Transport and Infrastructure and member for Ballarat. Great to have you back with us on Flow.
It's really lovely to be with you, Ricky.
There was a splash of announcements on Friday about the Building Better Regions Fund. What's your view on how fair the distribution of that was?
Well, we saw Barnaby-Joyce, I guess, up to his old trick, shoveling $300 million out the door on Friday for projects in regions. But unfortunately, when we went and had a look at the analysis and we looked at where the money was going and the vast proportion of it, 90% of it is going to seats that the National Party or the Liberal Party hold or their members hold, or that they're going to definitely be targeting at the next election, like the Hunter, where we saw the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby-Joyce out basically defending this program, saying that he's perfectly entitled to rort it and he doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. So there's, really for regions that have missed out, and there are regions that have got a little bit of funding, but generally it tends to be at the sort of $50,000 mark as opposed to any of these really large-scale infrastructure projects. It's unfair from a number of reasons. One, there is need across regions in the community. There are also, COVID has hit regions across the community in different ways, but certainly the regions in Victoria, such as Ballarat, Geelong and Bendigo, where we have been locked down pretty substantially, have received a tiny proportion of funding, so none of the really big infrastructure projects that generate jobs, that have long-lasting legacies. We've got small money for some small projects and some small events, but other regions have done really well out of it. And I think this just goes, again, to the way in which the government is operating. It uses taxpayer money in order to shore up its own electoral advantage. It did it with car park rorts, it did it with sports rorts. The Building the Better Region Fund has been rorted for years. The Australian National Audit Office is in fact looking at it at the moment, and we've just seen this again in round 5. And so for those communities that got projects, well done, but there are lots that missed out, and it's just been, I think, again, just an example of why the government doesn't want an independent commission against corruption, because it knows that its own people are right up to their necks in it.
Well, coming on the Independent Commission Against Corruption, Mr Shorten, former Labor leader, has indicated he thinks one is needed after the allegations that are being aired in the IBAC today. What's your view on whether that strengthens the case for a federal ICAC?
Absolutely. I think it is well timed. The only jurisdiction that doesn't have one is the federal jurisdiction, and I think it's well past time. I think we've seen time and time again that now political, particularly on the Conservative side, but not just, obviously politicians need something to cause them to pause about the actions that they're doing. There needs to be much greater transparency in decision making. And I think if, there are politicians out there that think they can get away with the sort of rorting that's been going on, or the sort of activities we've seen a minister resign for in Victoria, then they've got another thing coming. And, it shouldn't have had to come to this, but it clearly has. And I think that Australians expect, we've always thought that it's other countries where corruption thrives. Well, it's starting to look pretty simply that that's happening in this country as well, and an independent commission against corruption is well and truly needed at the federal level. And this Building Better Regions Fund's brought, and the way in which, frankly, we've seen the Deputy Prime Minister of the country just say, oh, look, this is perfectly okay. Why is it pork barrelling? It's not pork barrelling just because we're putting it into our own seats. I think shows you everything you need to know about the government and the way in which they view taxpayer money.
Well, with the allocation process, we were speaking with the federal member for Mallee, Dr. Anne Webster. She mentioned that there is an independent review of the funding, and they give like a green rating to those they think should go ahead. But then she said there's a pink rating given to those projects where there's room for a local MP to make the case that it should be pushed up to green. Does that pass muster with you?
Well, can I say that's the first that anyone has heard of that? So I have absolutely no idea what this green and pink or red light rating is. So again, is that some secret selection process that the National Party have for their own national MPs? Like, what is that? I've represented a regional seat for 20 years, and I can tell you now, I've never heard, and we've been putting in Building Better Region Fund applications for years. That's the first I've heard of it, and we'll certainly be asking some questions at Senate estimates if that's the claim she's been making. This is basically what happens is that, the applications go in, the Department of Infrastructure gives recommendations. There's a ministerial panel chaired by Barnaby-Joyce and some National Party MPs, and they basically decide where the projects are going. And what they've decided this time is that 90%, 270 million out of 300 million, is going to the seats that they hold or they want to win at the next election. That's what they've decided. And, this pink, green MP, MPs, of course, are open at any stage to make representations about projects. And, of course, we all do that. But, if there's some secret process that she's just talked about, well, I'd be very interested to know what that is as a regional MP. I've never heard of it.
Well, the indications also from her and across the border Tony Passon MP were that somewhere in the region of 5 to 8 times the amount of funding that was granted could have been granted in terms of the amount of people who actually applied. What's Labor's view on the merits of the fund if it's properly administered and whether it should be larger?
I think that there's definitely a room, anyone who lives in a regional area knows that we are behind the eight ball when it comes to infrastructure, and particularly our local councils being smaller and having smaller populations struggle to have that rate base to be able to build some of these large-scale infrastructure projects like sporting precincts and arts and theatre and things like that provide great livability in our region. So there's no doubt that there is a need for this. There's a need for some sort of separate program in our growing suburbs as well, where councils are struggling to keep up with infrastructure needs. There's no doubt about that. But when you've got, so if you look, for example, in this program, 34% of Labor seats are held, are eligible for this program. So you would think that there'd be a pretty reasonable distribution that, a fair amount of that 34% of those Labor seats would get something. Only 16% of those seats held by Labor got something. And when we did get something in those Labor seats, it tended again to be, a very small amounts of money. And for events such as in Bendigo, they got $40,000 to hold a couple of food events. Again, important to reawakening tourism there in Bendigo as we come out of COVID. But it's nothing, like having a $10 million project that is going to employ locals. It's going to provide opportunities for local manufacturers to contribute their goods and services, whether it's from landscaping services right the way through to building services. It's nothing like that in terms of giving a boost in the economy. And I think just the sheer unfairness of it that we're seeing with this Building Better Regions Fund under this government, it frankly has just got to stop, and it's indefensible.
Now, just lastly, Ballarat, your electorate, and say Corangamite nearby, have you got to hand how much Ballarat or Corangamite got under this BBRF round?
Yeah, so in my own seat, I haven't looked at Corangamite yet, but in my own seat there was a $500,000 project in Ballarat, so nothing in the city of Ballarat itself, so nothing for the town. In Ballarat, the Scout Hall, again, something that's been very much needed, which is fine. And then there's a smaller project in the township of Trentham, which is both of which are in my electorate, both under, I think the smaller grant's about $50,000, I think the project in Trentham as well.
So that sounds like
again,
it's pretty small.
But it's small.
Small amount in terms of, it's not millions, is it, that came into your electorate, which is interesting.
No, definitely not. And, the seat of Corio, which, covers Geelong and all of that, I think they've got a very small amount of money, and Bendigo 40,000. So I think, and often the economic growth in these bigger towns actually does drive economic growth in some of the smaller towns as well. So you want your big regional cities to do well. You don't want them to, suck in all the money, but what you want them to do is do well, because they often employ people from all of the smaller towns as well. So it really doesn't make any sense, and it just, I don't think it's defensible, frankly. And I think the Deputy Prime Minister swanning around saying this is, I don't care, really. Well, if there was an independent commission against corruption, I think he would care, and he should.
Yeah, when you look at 6 to 8 million in Grey, Barker and Mallee, for instance, that funding, it's a pretty stark contrast. So we look forward to you keeping us updated on how things go in investigating further. Yeah, thanks for that. And as I said, I don't begrudge money going into those areas. It's desperately needed, and I know the projects will be welcome and they'll be good projects. But, frankly, the Rorting's got to